my goodness. Okay. Seriously, this is the last time I'm recording this voiceover. I can't even count how many times I've done it at this point because I just want to be able to talk to you like I normally would if you were sitting here in front of me and we're chit chatting like friends, talking about the good life of being an artist. Hi, my name is Rachel. I am an artist based in the United States, and what we are watching here is the underdrawing that I did for the banner on my YouTube channel. The idea behind this was that art is magic. That sounds super cheesy, but I also actually do feel that way. Okay, but I didn't always feel that way, especially when I was in school. So I went to school for 4 years, and for the first 3 years, there was the focus on the fundamentals, which I actually totally believe that you do need to have a solid grasp on, even if the end goal of what you're doing is kind of like what I'm drawing, something cartoony, something not based on realism. I mean, it is based on realism, but you know what I mean. It's not trying to be realism. So, yeah, for the first 3 years, we focused on perspective and anatomy and realism and learning colors, all that good jazz that you need to know to be able to play with. And I actually am an artist who, when I was growing up, I didn't draw from my imagination at all. I always got picture books that I would replicate, or I would pull pictures and draw from them, but I never drew from my own imagination. So the first 3 years of school were beautiful for me because this is how I approach things, right? Observation, drawing, getting better, seeing my mistakes, improving, and all of that good stuff. But at the same time, it was kind of discouraging to a certain degree because I was like, I don't know how to draw from my head. And the sole reason I came to school for illustration was to become a children's book artist. And that might not be a potential because how am I supposed to draw these fantastical scenes and all of this stuff out of my head? I mean, that's not necessary. There are a lot of artists who do take reference photos and who draw from those. But I will say, for me personally, if I am trying to draw something that isn't realism and I have a photo in front of me, unintentionally it becomes more and more realistic and it becomes stiffer as I am drawing. So for me, I will, if I need to look at a photographic reference, I pull up the image, I'll look at how it is, kind of memorize the lines or the shape and the flow of what's happening in the pose. There was an artist who said that they would describe things to themselves. They'd be like fluffy, billowy, terms in their own head. So when they looked away from the reference image, they would be drawing from that instinct. And that's what I've kind of approached in my drawings as well. So even if I am looking at reference, I'm not having the reference up next to me. It's something that I've looked at and kind of absorbed and then stepped away from. But yeah, so for those first couple years, and that's all I'm doing, I'm like, I'm never going to be able to accomplish my dream. And it was kind of disheartening because, as nice as realism is, and the products that you get at the end of it that are just beautiful, it's not what I wanted to do. I didn't enjoy the process, which is 99% of what you're doing, right? Like the finished piece and showing it off, that's such a small moment on the timeline of what you're doing with art. And it wasn't until pretty much the last year that I took two classes, children book illustration and concept design. And within those two classes, I was able to play with the style that you're seeing. I mean, this is the end product of all those experimentations. And let me tell you, they were ugly experimentations because I had no idea what I was doing. This was a completely different way of drawing for me. It was a completely foreign, just way of being within art, and I fell on my face more times than I can count. And you know what? I still wanted it. I didn't care that I was embarrassed about these. I didn't care that they looked bad because I just wanted to get where I needed to be. And if it meant drawing tons of ugly things, well, freaking A, I don't care. Let's do it, you know? I actually had a teacher my first year in art school who I was drawing, and he was like, you know what, line art is, you're not, that's not what you should do. You need to focus on how you draw and lean into your strengths, which is you draw like a painter. And I was like, okay. And I didn't listen to him, obviously, because this is all line work that you're seeing right now. I just continued to look at other artists that I loved. I saw how they were approaching things. I experimented and kept trying. I didn't give up, but I also didn't like let myself sit with bad illustration, right? I kept analyzing and critiquing and reapproaching and coming back to what I wanted to do. So, I'm definitely a big supporter of follow your dreams, but I'm also somebody who very much supports people needing to push themselves and grow as artists. So, right now, what you're seeing is obviously I've changed the direction that I was going with the piece, but it's still the same thing. So, art is magic, but I myself, as the illustrator, I don't need to be magical. I don't need to be a witch. I'm just going to be me as an artist illustrating. The original reason why I had gone with a witch theme is because the comic book I am working on actually deals with witches. And so I was just kind of going with that theme, but then I was like, you know what? It's not me. And I want this banner to show, you know, what I'll be doing on this channel, but it doesn't have to be quite so literal because a lot of it will be focused around magical people and things and stuff like that. So yeah, so let's actually talk about my comic book. So for my BFA, I did 10 finalized pages of a comic book, the first 10 pages of my comic book. So that means that it had the line work like you're seeing here, and it had color, and it had the narration and dialogue on it as well. And I also completed the manuscript for the remaining pages of the comic. I ended up submitting it to a publisher recently. It can take up to 3 months for a publisher to reach back out to you to let you know if they're going to move forward with the project or not. I'm not even a third of the way through. Like, it wasn't that long ago that I submitted it. But yeah, it's super exciting. So, my comic is a reimagining of the story of the 12 dancing princesses. It has moved pretty far away from that original source, but the bones of the story are still that framework, right? Like the key points that are hit on the story and things like that, but it is gone so differently. I really like the way that the story's gone, and I hope that you guys will too, because my goal is to have this ready to publish or kickstart by the end of the year. So that kind of depends on a couple of different factors. If the publishing house decides to move forward with the book, it would depend on their timeline, you know, and when it would be published. I know that sometimes it can take books a couple of years to get published, even after they've been picked up. If it is me self-publishing, by the end of the year, I should have the book done, or the vast majority of the book done, and ready to kickstart. So either of those two paths kind of mean different things for the channel. If my book is picked up by publishers, obviously I won't be able to share with you the pages that I'm working on for them, but I will still be doing small illustrations or exploratory illustrations for the book that aren't necessarily going to be in the book. And so that way we can still see processes and talk about storytelling and approaches and what it's like to work on a comic and all that kind of stuff that I personally find interesting and love listening to other illustrators touch on in their podcasts and in their YouTube channels as well. So, and I want to share with you guys tips and tricks that I have been shown or that I have come across or that I personally just, that's how I approach my art, and share those things with you. None of the stuff that I'm sharing would probably really be groundbreaking or new. But the thing of it is maybe you haven't read the books that I have. Maybe you haven't watched the videos or listened to the podcasts that I have. So you're not getting that information from those sources, but I can share those sources with you, and I can be somebody that you see those things being done through, right? If the book does not get picked up by the publisher, which can happen for a variety of reasons, right? Like potentially they feel like my style isn't a good fit for them, or they have a similar project that they're already working on. I mean, there's a ton of different reasons. And if that happened, I would still be moving forward, like I said, to plan on a Kickstarter. I would be putting out pages as a webcomic until that point. So I would be able to share with you page process and, more in depth with what's going on in the comic. Again, I would still be doing pages that are just designs for the book that aren't necessarily going to show up in it. So I also am hoping to cultivate a little art community here on YouTube. I had gone out of state for my degree, and now I am back home and kind of by myself in terms of having art peeps around me. So, yeah, getting to geek out over all things art with you lovely people will be amazing. So, I'm kind of excited about that. So, let's talk a little bit about like what we're looking at here. So, you saw the undersketch that I did, and then I lightened that layer so that I could do the finalized line art on top of it. I sketched out everything, and then I am starting to lay in flat colors, right? There's no shading, there's no dimension. It's just the color that's local to that object, right? The hair or the cat or the table. I have also started coloring the line art itself, right? So if you look at the ruler, it's not black outline, it's a darker brown. I don't always do this, and in fact, in my comic, most of the time, I am just using straight black line. This process takes a lot longer. I use it for certain areas within the comic itself if the effect needs it in that particular place. But this way of doing line art where you color it in, I mean, I saw that in cartoons, they do this all the time. So if you go back and you look at like Disney cartoons and you pause and you like zoom in or anything like that, you'll notice that the line art itself isn't black, really. I mean, maybe in a few areas, or maybe there's a few movies that do that, but generally speaking, they color in the line art and it gives it a much softer, more natural appearance than black lines do. But in terms of speed, obviously this really slows down the process. So especially with comics and the volume that I'll be doing, let's not talk about that. I mean, there's a lot of pages coming down the pipe works. For me, sometimes I'm like, Rachel, you're crazy. Why are you doing this to yourself? And then I'm like, because I want to. I want to tell the story, and this is the right format for it. Actually, that's a interesting point to bring up for me and the story, because originally my 12 Little Witches were a picture book. I had done a book mock-up of it. I had the script written out for it, and I was starting to work on it. And I realized that it was not working for me. Like, it didn't feel right. I needed for me to show more of the story, and this is still when it was more closely aligned with the original story of the 12 Dancing Princesses. But I was just like, this isn't enough. Like, I'm not getting to really show the world. I'm not really getting to delve into this. I wanted people to like experience, the story. And I was halfway done with my BFA project, and I was like, all right, I'm changing it up. I was kind of told to not do that out of the goodness of my professors' hearts, because they're like, you're crazy, like just finish out the book, and then if you want, do a few pages as the comic, because you've already put in so much work. And I was like, I can't. I was like, this isn't right. I am a stubborn SOB. I've done that with a lot of projects, actually. If I didn't like the way that it was being colored or the way that it was drawn out, I would scrap projects like the day before and redo them. Like, I'd rather turn in a project that I was proud of, even if it maybe wasn't 100% completed. Most of the time, I actually did get them completed. But I'd rather turn in that project than one that I knew wasn't my best work. Like, for me, going to art school wasn't just to like get the degree, it wasn't just to get good grades, but to become a good artist, like to become the best artist I could. And that's how I approached my assignments. So, anyways, I decided to completely redo my project, which means I redid the script and I drew out those pages and I colored all those pages, and then I redid the rest of the script. We could go into the process of writing for stories, visual stories, or just stories in general, if you guys would like more in depth talk about that stuff. But it is kind of a push and pull. Like, as you're drawing, you're rewriting, and as you're rewriting, you're redrawing, and it's really interesting. And even though I have the rest of the script written out, things could change. It's kind of interesting. So right now you're seeing me lay in the shadows. I'm using a multiply layer for that. So it's a very light purple. You can see it on the teapot. It's a very pale purple, but it definitely gives that dimension that I otherwise wouldn't have. It's not necessary. If you look at a lot of comics, they actually don't, they won't do this. They'll just lay in the flat color. Maybe they'll have like giant shapes for shadows and things like that. But again, I feel like for me, my art is pretty heavily influenced by cartoons. I just love them. And so I've kind of folded that in. And right now you're seeing me put in the highlights on the image, which are done with an overlay shadow. And again, this is a very pale color as well. Whale as well. So it's just a little nice subtle pop of color that I feel like makes the image look more dynamic, which is what I'm going after. Yeah, it takes me more time. Do I want to admit how long all of my art takes me? No, because I feel like so many people just fly through. But anyways, so we are coming up at the end of the video. I'm testing a few little special effects that I don't feel really fit in with the style of this illustration, so I get rid of them. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hanging out with you guys and talking about more art stuff in upcoming videos. All right, bye.